anyway, so here we are already at the beginning of March. March 11, are you kidding me? It's like flying. So who's already into training season? Yeah, full on. So today we wanted to talk to you guys about some triathlon myths, and from a training perspective, but also from a gear perspective, and kind of all the above. So if you guys have questions, please feel free to key those in, and we will respond to those as well. So we wanted to start today's session by talking about strength training. Is that important while doing all this cardio? I mean, some people are like, oh, it's gonna make me bulky, it's whatever. But what's the deal with strength training? Do we need to do it, or is it just a waste of time?
I would say it's a waste of time.
Totally.
No, honestly, guys, what makes you bulky is food. So if you're taking in a bunch of sugar and a lot of excess food, you're actually going to store that as fat. But in relation to strength training, I would limit it to 3 days a week, and that's just because we have so much load on our bodies. But if you think about when we're doing cardio, essentially we're breaking down the muscles. So in order to build those up, that's why we add the strength training in. Be very specific on the movements you're doing. Stay functional, do balance, do a lot of single leg based things, a lot of single arm things. Don't negate your upper body, because that helps with our posture. It helps with, of course with swimming, but then as we're running and cycling, we still need that upper body strength. And again, we know core and hips. So the more that we can strengthen those muscles, the better. And just watch your nutrition. I mean, if you're going to get bulky off of doing 3 days of lifting weights, we need to talk about your hormones, because that's actually it's pretty hard to do.
It's funny, you said the word posture, and I went, oh, hello. How do I put those shoulders back?
Good running form.
Yes.
Exactly. Okay, well, and building our back body and stuff like that, it aids in making us faster, right?
Definitely, absolutely.
Building up those muscles, making us faster.
And also injury prevention. I mean, that's one of the great things I think come from strength training. And one of the mistakes I see people making in terms of triathlon strength training is they overuse the same muscles that they use in swim, bike, and run in strength training, whereas what you want to do is you want to supplement that, especially when you're in season now, that you're starting to have more volume, you're starting to do longer rides, more strength work on the bike and on the run, whereas you want to supplement that by doing motions, especially in these directions, because swim, bike, and run is all in this direction.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's right. Well, and let's talk a little bit about swim. So when I'm in the pool and I'm doing 3,000 yards or whatever it is, so sometimes I skip the flip turns, because I'm like, I don't flip turn when I'm doing a race, right?
Right, you don't. That's true.
But
the thing, there's an interesting study that a guy named Thomas Gerlach did, who is a professional triathlete, kind of a nerd of, kind of all the different science. So he kind of swam some laps without, swam some laps with flip turn, and tried to understand, should you really do flip turns? And one of the things that came out of it, which is I think the prevailing reason to do flip turns, is that two things in a pool. The first is the fastest you're going to be in the pool is when you push off the wall.
For sure.
And the second is that the mistake most people have in the pool is they don't use the wall as a chance to reset their form. And flip turning puts you in the right position to adequately push off the wall, rather than grabbing and going straight up and going and then trying to push off the wall, and you're like this, rather than pushing off the wall in this position. So that's one of the real reasons that I see benefit of doing a flip turn.
And reinforcing the streamline, getting you back into
in streamline, good body position. And a lot of times what we do with inexperienced swimmers is we don't have you swim 3,000 yards continuous. We break it up in hundreds and 200s. And the reason we do that is as your body fatigues, what happens is your form deteriorates in all three sports, but especially in swimming. And as your form deteriorates and you just are continuing to go for more volume, all you do is reinforce bad form. So you can do all these drills and all the things at the front side of the swim, but if you don't get in good body technique and good form, as you get fatigued, it breaks down. So taking a 10-second or 15-second rest every 100 or 200 to then push off the wall and get right back in good body position is actually very beneficial to your swimming.
So what would that look like in relation to, we were just talking about flip turns. So if you're taking those breaks, how would you expect them to turn off the wall? Very similar?
Yeah, very similar.
One hand on, extend
One
over?
hand on, extend off, and push straight in. Hands overhead, locked up, like this, going forward.
Yep. Streamline.
You really want to feel when you push off that your hips come to the wall, and when you start to kick, you should feel your feet being at the top of the water. If you can't kick and feel your feet almost come out of water, then most likely you're probably pushed off and you're in the wrong position.
Well, and you mentioned drills. So with trying to get all of our swim volume in and getting that endurance in the pool, Are drills necessary? I know the answer, but I'd like to hear what you have to say.
I'm gonna say yes, but you are the swim expert. I do it because it's nice recovery for me. Half the time I'm coming off of like another workout, so it just mentally it gets me back into perspective of where I need to be in the water. I think about when you said get your heels up, get your butt up. You know, you're always thinking about engaging the core. So if we can slow our stroke down just a little bit, and like implement fingertips and fists and things, I find that to help me get back into the rhythm of good form.
So I'd say the short answer is yes, drills are important, but I also get to a point where there's a fine line where you don't want to become a really good person at doing drills, but not a good swimmer.
Sure.
So sometimes I see people doing so many drills and they're kind of just haphazard of like, well, I need to do like 500 of drills and then I'll do 500 to swim. That you're almost like, are you doing too many drills? Or are you doing drills the wrong way?
Right.
So what I like to do is I like to do a drill and then follow it with swim. So like 25 kick, 25 swim. So 25 kick where you're really emphasizing the kick, really making sure you're engaging the right muscles, getting your body into position, and then immediately turn that right into swim to reinforce it. Because drills are really just we're isolating an item so that you can mentally attach the feeling that you get in water, because it's much more difficult to get that precipitation to understand how your body is behaving in water compared to like swimming compared to like biking or running, where you can kind of look at your run form as you're running and go, okay, I feel like I'm leaning back, or I feel like I'm doing this incorrectly, or my cadence is too slow, etc. Whereas in swim, you really are trying to get an understanding between the mind and how the body's working, and then put that into work.
Well, and drills are reinforcing proper form, so that we're learning how to put that all together and to break it down, and then just to see if we're lacking in some areas, and then working on that. The USAT book, the Complete Guide to Triathlon, goes into drills and says that they are as important as your main set, or more important. And when I read that, 5 years ago when I was first certified, I was like, oh my word, you're kidding. Because for years and years, I just jumped in and just did the bulk of it, and just to get the yardage down. So
Now, I will say one of the things that I think we talked about on one of the previous podcasts of kind of how you plan your season. I will oftentimes, with athletes that train year round and really race more in the fall, summer and fall, I'll really have them be a very heavy drill focused October to February, early March, and then you kind of transition in where we won't do a lot of drills in the summer. We'll do enough just to kind of on recovery days, we'll do lots of drills. Pulling is a great drill, kicking, but at that point the volume will be much higher. You'll have more fatigue, and we're really just trying to get the volume in.
Utilizing those early months for swim blocks. And,
foundation work.
Yep, absolutely. So, speaking of swim, do we need to get our swim stroke down to like 11, 12 strokes per 25? Is that important in triathlon?
Triathlon, no. And it's one of the
training?
biggest. It's one of the biggest myths. So, and everyone I think has been at the pool at some point. You've had someone in your master swim or someone walking by going, "Oh, are you new to swimming? Oh, and someone says, "Oh, anything you see with my stroke? Yeah, and get your stroke down to like 11 or 12, and then you'll really know how you're swimming, because then you'll be efficient." And what happens when most people slow down is they just glide, and so their body sinks and they glide and they get slower, and they're like, "Oh, but I'm more efficient. I could do this forever because I'm really not exerting much effort." The problem is when you get to open water, it's a much different environment. Open water is choppy, it's challenging, there's people around you, and slower cadence kind of dies in open water. If you look at the pros and the top age group athletes, like in a half Ironman and Ironman, you'll see their cadence is somewhere around 75 to 80 strokes a minute, and they're swimming about 100 in a minute 5, minute 8. So they're taking about 70 strokes a minute. So if you're doing like 11 strokes per length, and that means, say you're swimming 2-minute pace, you're swimming like 22 strokes and they're swimming 70, it's no wonder they're going a whole lot faster.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, a couple of things with that. The reason that people tell you to slow down your stroke is because you want to have a better catch and pull. And that's really what they're trying to tell you. They're just kind of telling you in the wrong way. So you want to develop that catch and pull so that you can increase the cadence and you can pull just as hard and increase the amount of times you turn over. It's just like in your run. There's only two things that make your run faster. Either a stride length gets longer or your cadence gets faster. So it's very difficult to change the stride length. So most people say, I'm just going to turn over the cadence quicker.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's in the swim, it's a little more complex because you have a lot of drag and body position issues. But what happens is if you can increase your cadence and pull more efficiently, then obviously you're going to go faster.
Marrying those two.
Together.
That's what it's all about.
And that's one of the things that it's taken me a long time as an athlete to learn, is that I'd, be able to swim great in a pool. And then you get to open water and you're like, two things, like, why is my swim speed so much slower? Well, hello. First of all, you don't have the wall.
Mm-hmm.
So, people are about 9 to 12% slower in open water than they are in a pool because you don't have the wall to push off of to gain that extra speed.
Right.
And second of all, you swim in a straight line in the pool. And if you're swimming at a lower cadence, you can be very efficient in a pool and go a long way in a short amount of time. But at the same point, when you get to open water, you've got to have that higher turnover, especially if you're in an up current swim or if you've got choppy conditions.
Mm-hmm.
And I used to just kind of glide and just get mouthful of water and then get my stomach sick, and it was really bad. So that's one of the things that I worked on, and Amanda and I were talking before the call about how we swim with a tempo trainer. So it is legal by USAT, it's legal for Ironman. It's basically just a cadence sensor that sits on your swim goggles, costs about $40. I think Finis is the top manufacturer of them. You can get them on Amazon.com. And so what you do is you just lock in, and that every time that beeps, you put your hand in the water.
Yep.
And so what's great about it is you can train at various cadences and say, okay, where do I need to get my cadence up to? And then I'll pretty much settle in when it comes race time for like a half distance. I'll know I can swim with a 62 cadence, and that gives me like a 135 per 100 open water pace. And all I gotta do is jump in and follow the beep. I don't have to worry about what everybody else around me doing. If somebody hits me, if somebody kicks me, I'm just following the beep and just focused in on that beep.
That's right. Yeah, it takes a lot of the thought out of it, doesn't it?
It takes the stress out of
Yeah.
it, especially if you're
Yeah.
someone who gets a little frazzled in open water sometimes, or especially someone who goes out too hard.
Sure.
Because you're not like, I'm gonna start I'm fresh, I'm going, and then you're like,
Hyperventilating.
500 yards in.
kayak.
Exactly. Well, and let's talk about the kick in swim. So sometimes we hear, oh, I shouldn't kick while I'm training or racing because then I need to save those legs, save them for the bike and the run. What do we know about that?
So I think that's one of the biggest bad myths that has ever been created. For a couple of reasons. One, first of all, in Middle Tennessee, most of our swims are non-wetsuit. So kind of the belief of not having to use your legs is the fact that your legs and your body are just gonna be sitting up on top of the water with a wetsuit, which we all get to do Chattanooga 70.3, and that's our one wetsuit race of the year, and we're like, woohoo, and then after that we're like, okay, we're non-wetsuit legal. So the kick is one of the 4 or 5 items that really controls the body position. So where you don't want to have a strong kick is you don't want to be kicking like a college sprinter. You don't want to have 6 or 8 beats per arm stroke in the kick. You want to have 1 or 2, potentially up to 4, and really just settle in where that the propulsion's only going to get about 10% from the kick.
That's right.
So 10% faster is good. But at the same point, your kick's not going to make you go that much faster. What it's really going to do is move your body position up to allow you to have the rest of the good fundamentals in place.
Help to negate the drag.
The drag.
I always talk about glute activation. So we look at the swim as the warm up for your bike and the bike warm up for your run. So if you're activating those glutes in the water from your kick, not only is it activating your core because you're stabilizing and lifting, but then you're also helping yourself in further, the 2 other sports that you're coming into. So I definitely am a big person on saying like let's kick as much as we can. But just like you said, there's a certain cadence. There's 4. I probably do 4 beats per stroke, but not a college sprinter.
And maybe people have experienced this where maybe they're not kicking enough, and I always tell my athletes that a good 100, 200 yards before swim exit, go ahead and really start vigorously kicking to really get that blood flow, so that when you go vertical, you're not like you don't get you don't get lightheaded or.
That's a good point.
That I think is important as well. So let's talk about matching bike and run cadence. What are the myths around that? I mean, we're talking totally different numbers as far as bike cadence is like 80, run cadence would be about 180. So let's talk about that.
Sure. So it is kind of interesting. 2 things, I think. The first is the optimum run cadence is something that was set like in a research study like in the 60s or 70s, where they looked at some of the top Olympic athletes and found that they all ran with like 180 to 185 cadence per minute. And so they kind of said that's the optimum cadence, and no one's really done a lot of research since then. Most athletes run at a cadence slower than that, which is an area that they have to get faster. But that was the first thing that I was ever told, because I had like a run cadence of 182, and so the first thing I was told when I got into triathlon by a triathlon coach was, all right, whatever you run, you should mirror your bike cadence exactly to it. So I was doing 90 cadence, so 90, 180. And so that's what I did. And I was just spinning around at 90 like crazy. But what I've learned since then, and what a lot of the research shows, is kind of the ideal cadence for biking is between 78 and 82. So when you think about bike cadence, a lot of people will tell you it's personal preference, and it is personal preference based upon what your limiter is. So what we find is people that run very high cadence really have muscular strength as their limiter. And people that run very low cadence, like 65 to 70, have aerobic endurance as their limiter. And so what you want to do in your training is you want to, if you're someone who runs very high cadence, you want to do a lot of sets with very low cadence, a lot of hill repeats, a lot of big gear, keeping your heart rate down, and then vice versa. If you're someone who has a very low cadence, you put on 5311 perhaps, and you just grind away at 65 and mash the pedals. You want to work on your pedal stroke and get it to be much higher. And so that being said, the two ideal cadences on their own are totally different. It's 78 to 80, and it's 180 to 185. And the reason for that is the point that's been proven to kind of allow you to optimize your speed. And so, in triathlon, you're not going to run better by doing a high cadence on the bike, and you're not going to, if you train correctly, not be so worn out muscularly if you go at 78 or 82. If you go like 65 cadence, then yeah, you're going to have completely trash legs.
Exactly. Not only to optimize speed, but to be efficient and to be able to go from bike to run, and even for the longer distance.
Yeah, most people that will run like a 90-95 cadence on the bike will end up kind of spinning themselves out aerobically. They'll just get so tired. And your body likes different changes as well. I mean, one of the things that's great about, or one of the things you see, for instance, like if you look at a course like Gulf Coast or Ironman Florida compared to like Chattanooga and Chattanooga 70.3, is a lot of people will bike faster and run faster on the Chattanooga course than they do on the Florida course. And they're like, why is that? It's pancake flat. It's because it allows you to engage other muscles. And it's funny, if you ever spectate either one of those Florida races, you can just see the people come into transition and they're kind of like hunched over and they're like, oh, my back. Because they were just in aero, the same gear the whole time. They haven't had to change anything, and they didn't engage any other muscles. They just got muscle overuse. Whereas Chattanooga courses that have a little more roll, a little more hill, allow you to use different cadences, different muscle groups, and because of that, you usually end up being able to fire all of them at the right time and go faster. So it is a myth to think that you should have them always the same. Your body likes variety, especially over a 2 to 14, 16-hour race, depending on whatever you're racing.
And we can even get out of the saddle on like Andrews and the 70.3, right?
Definitely.
In Chattanooga? Yeah. There's no myths about being in the saddle versus out of the saddle, and what advantages or disadvantages we have there.
I think a big component of that is heart rate. Are we able to keep a level heart rate? Because if we go into this initial like shock and spike, then are you going to recover efficiently, and are you able to get back into a normal cadence as well as an opportunity to like recover going into off of the hill? I think that's the biggest point. So if someone can stand up efficiently, keep their heart rate at a level pace, and then continue to recover, I'd say that's completely fine. If someone has to stay seated and go at a higher spin, I mean, it's just dependent on that, in my opinion.
And a lot of times people will get a higher heart rate doing that in aero spin, which is always interesting. You see the people in like the $8,000 bikes, and they're in aero all crouched down going like 7 miles an hour up a hill, and you're like, kind of interesting, because you really don't get any aero benefit below, I think it's like 12 miles an hour on the bike. So you're like, all those fancy wheels and all that stuff, when you get to a hill, it doesn't really matter. Give your body a break. Use those big muscles in your glutes. Sit back in the saddle, activate the core.
Open up the lungs,
Absolutely. And if you do stand up, I mean, the best technique that I've seen to stand up is you add gear, because you're going to generate more power when you get out of the saddle. And then you do like 6 to 8 pedal strokes, and then you sit back down. And then you go for like another 15 strokes, and then you get out and do 6 or 8 more until you kind of get up the hill. And it all depends on the size of the hill, and to the point Amanda made about your heart rate. If it's like a mile long hill, then that's a totally different strategy than if it's like a short punchy hill that you're just trying to get up.
Right, you're not going to stand up out of the saddle for a mile for sure.
Yeah, and you should have different heart rate zones. You should have different heart rate zones, kind of long hill, short, if it's an under 2 minute effort or over a 2 minute effort, you kind of should have different areas of like, all right, here's where I need to stay underneath.
Yeah.
Well, and let's talk a little bit about gear, because you were talking about like the $8,000 bike, and there are people who are maybe leery of getting into triathlon or think I can't afford all the gear, or who have maybe been doing it for a couple of years and want to kind of level up. And let's talk a little bit about gear and ending, also including wetsuits as well. Is it, what is absolutely necessary? What is worth it? What's worth our dollar? What's the best bang for the buck, etc.?
So what is necessary?
Shoes.
Shoes
100%.
and a pair and a bike and a helmet.
And a helmet. And
Goggles are optional.
Mm.
Preferred.
Goggles,
Not required.
are
Not required.
inexpensive.
Not required. Preferred. And you have to
All
wear
of
the
this is
swim cap.
necessary. We're talking about the amount of money in which we're spending.
Yeah.
How much money we would spend on this stuff. We obviously need helmets. We obviously need goggles, and we need a bike and shoes.
I mean,
but yes, where are we spending the money? Shoes are on board. Like I would say, the top notch.
Yeah, I think I did my first triathlon with a mountain bike, and that was pretty much it. And a pair of shorts and a shirt. And it's as simple as that.
It can be. That's
It
right.
can be, and a lot of it depends on your goals. I mean, if you're
That's
trying
right.
to squeeze out 10 minutes of your time, then you can buy some speed, for 10 or 15 minutes in a full distance, or like 5 or 7.5. But I will always say, if you look at all the things that are supposed to incrementally add speed, I've added all of them at some point in time, and I haven't got all the compounding effect of a mile an hour from the helmet, 7 or 8 minutes from the aero wheels, 10 minutes from the time trial bike.
Not
If you
what
take
they're
all of them
showing
up,
in
I'd
the
be
wind
like, well, wait a minute, because that's not where you ride. You don't
Right.
ride in the wind tunnel.
That's
You ride
exactly
on
right.
rolling country roads
Yeah.
with different items. So,
That's right.
I think, where do you get the most value in terms of dollars spent? It really depends on what your strength is. Obviously the bike is the area that you can spend the most money. And, there's been a lot of research that's come out about the long tail aero helmets that, most people don't stay in TT position long enough to really get the full benefit of that. So you're better off to wear a helmet that cools properly
Absolutely.
And
to
it's
keep you
comfortable.
cool and comfortable.
Yeah.
And obviously safe, because all of them, the first reason for a helmet is safety. And then the next is actually staying in aero. A lot of people spend a lot of money on a bike and then they ride standing up.
That is such a good point.
So, get a bike fit, make sure you're in aero
Yeah.
the majority of the ride, to where you're gonna have the smallest plane that wind has to go around. And then, the wheels probably is the next biggest area where you can get some benefit. But, there's been a couple studies that have showed actually for men that if you shave your legs, it's almost the same benefit you get as using aero wheels. I mean, depends on your hairiness factor. But Jesse Thomas, who's kind of a pro triathlete, did some studies and actually showed he got 7 minutes by
Wow.
going from Chewbacca to, clean shaven, and having a tri-top with sleeves. There's been a lot of studies lately that have shown the tri-top with sleeves, which is only an incremental $15 or $20, does have a lot of benefit compared to the sleeveless. And then beyond that, the rest of the stuff, really depends. If you're trying to chase through your world championship slot for whatever race you're doing, and you really want 1 or 2 minutes, or are not afraid to spend $3,000 or $4,000 for a couple minutes, there are people that do that. But for the most people, it's not really going to change your enjoyment of the sport.
Exactly.
Wetsuits is kind of an interesting one, because most of us don't get a chance to test wetsuits, and there really are not a lot of independent data where people go and test them. But what has been kind of a prevailing trend is that the more higher end wetsuits now are becoming more supple. So there are different thicknesses in the sleeves, around the neckline, to make you more comfortable, and to where it doesn't impinge your stroke as much as kind of that 6mm heavy rubber that used to be. But also there are different grades of rubber. So the cheaper ones that are $100 to $250 are much more rigid material, so they're going to be less comfortable when you put them on and wear them. Whereas the $800 ones are going to feel like they fit you like a glove, without any problem. The interesting thing with wetsuits is that anytime you look at a swimmer with a wetsuit and without a swimmer without a wetsuit, that the faster you are, the less benefit you get from a wetsuit. So if you're like the college level swimmer that can swim like a minute 15 to a minute 30 pace or faster, and you're going to get very little benefit. I think like on a half distance you're going to get like 2 minutes. So if it takes you less than 2 minutes to get it off when you get out, you're really just kind of breaking, you're getting a little benefit, but not much. Whereas a slower swimmer that's, let's say, 2 minutes and slower pace per 100 yards is going to get around 5 to 7 minutes, I think, from the studies I've seen. And so they're actually going to get more of a benefit. And why is that? So the benefit is because the stronger swimmers hold what's called tautness. They hold their body much more firm in the water. So their body is throughout the core engaged, and they're like this in the water. Whereas kind of if you think about them going like this, as I kind of show my hands through the water, a swimmer that's weaker is going to kind of noodle. So you're going to see the legs kind of go like this. They're going to not kick straight like that. They're going to be kind of like this. And they're going to kind of almost snake through the water a little bit because they're not able to hold that core tight. So they get more of a benefit because the wetsuit adds compression and it adds lift in the hips to take all that out of the equation for the bad technique.
Less expensive suit.
For both suits. But the interesting thing is the less expensive suit is stronger, tighter material and actually helps the weaker swimmer more.
And is more buoyant.
So it's not going to be as comfortable on the neckline and the shoulder, so obviously, or in your arms, but it is going to be firmer. And if you are a slower swimmer, don't get tricked into thinking, oh, well, to get fast, I've got to get an $800 wetsuit. Most likely, you're going to be faster in the $79 to $115 wetsuit than you would. And you're always going to be faster in a sleeved wetsuit. Some people are less comfortable in a sleeve, so they go sleeveless, and that's fine, but you'll always be faster in a sleeve wetsuit. And that's why the pros always wear a sleeve wetsuit. And so, unfortunately, there's not areas to really play around much with wetsuits, but you can look at the various manufacturers' return policies. And one of the things you can do is you can order 3 of them or find races where people are at and go try them and do a set distance on a set course and do them with one wetsuit and then come back out, change, take a break, go back into it with the other wetsuit and see for yourself which one's faster for yourself.
We can do some of these demos on April 26th when we're up at the lake.
With rope go.
I've got sleeveless and sleeves, so I'm gonna try it.
I've got like 4 wetsuits, so yeah. I'm probably in the market to sell some.
Yes,
exactly.
We'll
so come and try. Too. Absolutely.
I want to add into that. So about gear, I always tell people, yes, gear can make you faster, but if you have all the gear in the world and you're putting all your money into that and not focusing on your training, not focusing on efficient, actual load, you're only as strong as your engine, right? So your nutrition makes a big difference too. I a lot of times tell my athletes, we'll be walking into transition, they'll be like, oh, that person's really fast. And I'm like, how do you know? And they're like, look at their stuff. And I'm like, you don't know their engine, right? Like, you don't know their prep for their race, you don't know anything. So really bottom line is do your stuff. Like, make sure you're getting your training done, do your nutrition, practice it day in and day out. Because then race day, no matter if your gear fails you or not, you're still going to have the engine. So that's really where my standpoint is on that.
Build the engine.
So I did the Sunrise Century course a couple of years ago, and there was a guy who was like on a single speed, and he beat more than half of the field. People were out there on their time trial bikes, and he was just super steady on it. And he was like coming from a mountain biker standpoint. And then also RB from RB Cycling. He always says, you may not be fast, but you can look fast. It's like, I got something to make you look fast.
That's absolutely right. I mean, sometimes it is about how you look. Like, you get a little bit more of a, hey, I feel great, but no, that's not going to matter in the long run at all.
That is true. Well, upon closing here, let's talk about one more thing real quick, and that would be our training volume. Does it always have to be big to be successful?
No.
And of course not.
No. Well, it depends what your goals are.
That's right. We have varying goals. We have varying distance of races. So we could do a sprint triathlon with 3 hours of training per week if we just really wanted to go and do our first race, or what?
I mean, I think it's really person dependent. I think what's as much important is how you train in the hours that you have.
Right.
And so I've seen people that do tons and tons of volume but no intensity, and they don't make very much gains. They're just always tired and hungry.
Just running themselves out.
And then I've seen people that do way too much intensity and not enough volume, and because of that, they're always getting injured.
Yes.
Because they're like, I'm going all out, like
Injured or not
every
ready for
time.
race day, not ready to
Right.
peak, not ready for the distance.
And so, I mean, you know, there's a lot of research that shows that, like, whatever you train, like 80% of your volume should be below like 72 to 75% of your max heart rate. And then like 10% should be 88 to 92% of your heart rate, and the rest just kind of falls in the middle. And so most people train in the middle 90% of the time rather than
Yes.
too low or too high. And that doesn't matter whether you're training 5 hours a week or 25 hours a week for a full Ironman at a pro level.
Yeah.
It's all the same. And I think we get a little bamboozled, so to speak, of looking at some of the pros data that they put out there that you're like, oh, look at Lionel Sanders, like he was going like 343 watts for like a 4-hour ride, but his heart rate was like 120. Like
Right.
he has an
can do it.
aerobic
He
engine
can
that's
sustain that.
like us going at like 16 miles an hour, like cruising along in a beach cruiser to get a cup of ice cream with our kids. I mean, it's like totally different set of situations. So
That's right.
it's really about, you know, what your goals are. It is, you know, if you get to long course endurance, endurance is the name of the game. I mean, so the more volume you can do at lower intensity, the stronger you're going to be, the better results you're going to have. However, don't get fooled into thinking, well, I'm a full-time parent, I'm a full-time spouse, I'm a full-time worker, I've got all these other church activities, I can't be in triathlon because I don't have enough time. That's not the case. We've seen people have great races and with the right amount of coaching or the right amount of expertise, and come and show up at a sprint and train, you know, 2 to 3, 4 hours a week and have an absolutely rock star experience, and sometimes be on the podium, sometimes just have a great day.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
Effective training. That's one thing with my short, limited hours. I do a lot of training, but when I get in the pool, I'm efficient. I'm not just doing a bunch of laps and just going through the motions. And the same with biking. Like I really am efficient in what I'm doing, and that's why coaching is so important, and knowing how your body responds, what you do best. Again, your goals have to play into that as well. So
Yeah, and to that point, efficient doesn't mean hard. It doesn't mean you're going out hard and trying to max out and you're in zone 5 all the time.
yeah, not at all.
No.
yeah, one of the things that I find that is my role as a coach is to get people to go easy on easy days, which they're not accustomed to.
Right.
And that's usually the biggest area of pushback I get from athletes. Like, oh, no, like that's not easy. Like I was running along at like 9:30. That's easy. I'm like, no. That's not easy. Your heart rate was X. That's not easy. And the second is, most triathletes are data driven, go all in, like, you know, go for it type people, very results driven, and having to tell them, whoa, you know, you don't need to train that much.
And results
Cut
are
back.
not linear. That's something that we need to constantly remind ourselves of. Even I have to remind myself of that. We're not doing this. Sometimes we're doing this so that we can do that, so that we can peak at the end of that cycle. So thank you guys so much. We really appreciate.
Likewise.
I'm so lucky to be able to work with you guys and to learn from your expertise. And just wondering if you guys who are on have any